Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Lies They Tell podcast. This is episode 15. For all of my returning viewers, I hope you and yours are in good health. I hope you are protecting your heart, your mind, your body, and your spirit. For all of those first time viewing, please be sure to hit the like, share, subscribe button. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you know every single time that I'm putting out content. Um, you know, just real quick, please be sure to go check out episode 14. I talked about a couple, current events here, both here in the United States and back home in Somalia. Some things that I found very interesting that I thought you guys could benefit from. Um, this is the Lies They Tell podcast. This is a place where we dispel any and all fallacies that are being forced upon us by they, them, big business, big pharma, the Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, and we really dive in and we look closer look at things. One thing I really, for today's episode, I'm gonna do something a little bit different. And as you guys can see, I'm kind of getting straight to it because it is something that is both personal for me that I've experienced and I've dealt with in my personal life, and also things that you know a lot of people out there are dealing with and that are having a hard time with it, if that makes sense. Um, Today what I want to talk about is PTSD, something very serious. It's called post traumatic stress disorder. Um, this is basically someone who has some sort of traumatic experience from the past, and because of that traumatic experience, it had, affected them. It is something that stays with them, and it basically, it gets inside. It's basically an experience that affected you so much that subconsciously it starts to, you take it in, and then it boils over at some point, and it starts showing itself in different emotional or physical or even spiritual ways, right? um Personally, for any of you that know me, and most of you do, you know I'm from Somalia. I'm a 90s baby. I was born in the year 1990. If you know, to two loving parents, may I add, you know what I mean? Alhamdulillah. Now, if you know anything about Somalia around this time, just a year or two after, there was a small, warring, areas. And by 1993, it exploded into full out civil war, to the extent where United States then had boots on the ground in Somalia in 1993. My family didn't really leave until 95, 96, I believe, something around something around those lines. I was about 5, 6 years old at the time. There are memories that I personally have dealing with, that I've dealt with. As young as I was, I do have split seconds and memories and little bits and clips. I'm sure a lot of you can relate of that point in my life. But one thing I do remember is, I do remember the sounds of gunshots. I do remember the sound of, thoughts of, or remembering bits and pieces, pictures of hiding and ducking and things like that, and then people around me being afraid. You know, um, Here's the thing, right? And I really don't want to, although I do want you guys to understand where I'm coming from, and I'm trying my best to be as transparent as possible. I'm not very good at speaking from a personal perspective, right? Intellectual, I could do it with you all day, but like personal and past and things like that, I have a hard time, and which I know a lot of you guys do too. So I hope you understand me making this video and putting this out there is actually in a way to give you guys a piece of me, but also to let those that are struggling know that you are not on your own. I myself personally have a theory, right? And this my theory is that any person, adult or child, who had lived in Somalia anytime during the 90s, all the way to the early to late 2000s, has some form of PTSD. Now, I don't know if PTSD is a spectrum, so I'm not sure if it's kind of like autism, where you can be on the far left, like far side of it, or you can be on the, like, other side of it. I'm not sure if it works like that, but there are some people I have met in my personal life that have reconfirmed this to me, right? Why I see almost every young Somali man that I've ever met, in my age group at least, or at least in my generation, has some sort of behavioral problem, whether it be anger issues, whether it be lashing out, whether it be that these children came from Somalia only to come here, their family and them having a second chance at life, and then coming here and then joining gangs and doing drugs and things like I feel like all these things are connected, right? But the I want to try to spin it a little bit and look at it from a different perspective. I want to look at it from the generation before us perspective, right? Because although I, like many of you, have suffered from things we've seen, things we've heard, and things that times, and I also want to make sure this is very important. I get this part, you know, it's not as you think. Like you don't there PTSD can work in a way where you don't even remember the trauma that happened to you. Your brain, subhanallah, was created in some sort of, Allah has created it with a self-defense mechanism, you know what I mean, where literally if your brain deems some memory or some images that you have or you were exposed to as being harmful to you, your brain will quite literally push it to the place where like you will forget, it will make you forget. But the problem is that's the conscious mind, and then you have the subconscious mind, the mind that we don't control, that we have no control over, right? And the one that we don't understand, that scientists cannot explain. When your subconscious mind receives information, that information goes nowhere, it stays there. And a lot of times, what, like I said earlier in the video, what happens is it showcases itself in your actions, in your speech, in your sleep cycle, in your eating habits. So going back to what I was saying though, and so keep that in mind. You don't always remember the trauma you've been through. Going back to what I was talking about, the older generation, I look at people like my mom, my dad. I look at people like a lot of your parents, right? Or if you are a parent yourself who has lived in Somalia through those timelines that I've said, you know, sometimes I sit back and I wonder just how much they deal with, how much they're keeping inside, how much they've never shared with us. Granted, my parents have shared a lot of stories with us, and I mean that us by me and my siblings. But at the same time, you know, there has got to be things that they themselves do not want to talk about, things that they've seen in Somalia at that time period, to be exact, right? And if you could only imagine how much of an effect that it had on the children that came up in that time, right? Who didn't even quite fully understand or were not even able to comprehend exactly what they were seeing. If we're gonna say, it affected them. Imagine the full grown adults who were able to actually think and understand what they were seeing and actually be able to try to rationalize, if any, right? If they even can, what they were seeing, what was happening, and why it was happening. I mean, it is a very gruesome thing to see, war. It's not normal. It's not okay, and I don't think the human brain was created to be able to take in that type of trauma or that those type of images mentally and actually make sense of it. We Muslims, and I know a lot of religious groups as well, Christians, Jews, Jewish, and I know we try, to rationalize it, especially as Muslims. We say inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong and to Allah we return, right? But that's those that have, met their demise. What about those of us that are still living and we get exposed to that? I'll give you a little story, and this is what I mean. So, you know, I remember one time, my parents told me a story of when we were younger, and when I was younger, more specifically. At the time, I was the youngest in my family. So, one of my sisters was literally, feeding me. And as she was feeding me, like, these guys ran into the house with AK-47s and things like that, like literally, like in my house, like my dad up against the wall, my mom up against the wall. They had it pointed at our heads and shit like that. So, imagine me as a child who was not able to understand what he was seeing, being affected by. We know that my brain was somehow, some way impacted by that, right? Now imagine the folks that actually could comprehend and did have, was able to understand what was happening, the terror that they felt, the uncertainty, like being faced with life and death. And luckily and fortunately, alhamdulillah, by the will of Allah, everyone in my family made it that day. No one passed away, no one was killed, right? And then, this is like a very, very, very like moderate. I'm trying to choose my words carefully, so I don't sound insensitive to what we went through, but this is a very moderate situation compared to what a lot of people have experienced back home. And fast forward, you have situations like that, right? And then plenty of other times where family members have been either were killed, or either like were subjected to, like, being terrorized by people who look like them, who sound like them, who practice the same religion as them, right? Like, trying to think about trying to make sense of this, right? So we have those kind of situations, and most Somalis, if not all of them, have somewhat or some way been affected by these events, right? Meaning the 90s and the early 2000s era of Somalia. So then what happens is that every single one of us, there's a mass migration into different parts of the world. And then those of us that were fortunate enough to stay together as a family, you know, we get sponsored somehow, some way, by a church or something, and then they bring us here to the States. What happens when they bring us to the States? They bring us to the States, and immediately every Somali person or every person of color that I've seen personally, right? I've seen other other ethnicities of, African descent. They get taken and they get put into some of the worst neighborhoods in this country. I'll give you another personal example. So I remember one day I was like kind of I remember one day that I came home from school, and it must have been something around that area. So I remember one day I came home from school, and literally I was upstairs. I think, if I remember correctly, there were steps like from my front door that leads upstairs, because we lived in an upper unit of a duplex, right? And so I was upstairs. I took my backpack off, and it was a beautiful day as I remembered it, and I remember looking outside the window, because it was basically as summer was breaking. The weather was really nice, and all the neighborhood kids was out there. Mind you, this is a very enough neighborhood, but I mean, as rough as it was, like, you're not gonna stop children from going outside and playing, right? So there were a lot of kids outside and stuff like that. And us being still new to the country, I don't think we had ever, gone outside in that neighborhood and actually played around. Granted, we've only lived there for a short period of time, and you'll find out why. Long story short, um, you know, I ended up like looking out the window for something, just watching other kids play. And I remember, like, directly across the street from us was another house, and it was like literally facing each other. And I remember that house right there, there was, a family lived there. And then I remember that their car pulled up. It was an older lady in the front seat. She wasn't too old, but she was older, a lot older than I was at the time. In the passenger seat, there was another guy that got off. And then in the back seat, there was a man on crutches. He had a broken hand and all that. Long story short, somebody walked up to them as they're helping the dude get out the back seat and started opening fire on him. Like, but like the thing is like I have front row seat, right? And all I remember seeing is like everybody dispersed, and it was just three people. It went from being like 40 people on the block to three people on the block, or four people, right? The three people and the one person who was licking shots at them, right? And so, like, the dude in the passenger, from what I could tell, got hit once or twice. And the dude, and I don't want to get too graphic, right? Because I do remember some graphic stuff, but like, he got hit a couple times. The other person got the worst of it, meaning the person in the back. And I just remember, like, the dude just walking away after he did what he did, and the lady like running, and she's like trying to figure out who to help first. They're both hit, and I guess she figured like the person in the passenger seat had a better chance, so she like started picking them up, and I can tell she was trying to give them some sort of assistance. My point is that, and now here you are, you were taken from one war zone and you were placed into another, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, and from our parents' perspective, at the very least, at the very least, in the first war zone, you understood the language, you understood the religion, you understood the social norms, society expectations. You knew your neighbors. Matter of fact, some of them were family. Most of them you grew up with. You had a sense of belonging. But now here you are in this new land, subjected to the same sort of hardships, in some ways worse and in some ways better than you had back home, you know? And, now are you not only afraid for yourself in your life, but you're also afraid for your children. And you're also afraid for their future and their outcome, right? I know I kind of went on a long ramble here, right? But like honestly, I've been noticing, in these environments that we are placed in, not only do we adapt to the culture of it, not only do we adapt to the way of living, but we also adapt to its culture, right? Meaning the music, meaning the type of things we watch, meaning the type of way we talk. And at the end of the day, you know, at 7 years old, by 7, 8 years old, witnessing, somebody get bodied and some more shit, like seeing all of that, and then like listening to the music and understanding that unfortunately hip hop is a genre of music which rewards and celebrates the one person who can say the worst things possible. Like it is literally a genre that celebrates the demise and the destruction of minority living spaces and minorities in general. Like just go back and think about how many rappers are in jail right now because of the extracurricular activities they had going on outside of being famous and having money. Like since when is being having fame and money not enough? Since when do you get, catapulted to this new level just to still want to prove something to the people on the level that you used to be on? And not only are you not proving something positive, you're also adding to the destruction of your people and of your home. You know, I've lost a lot of friends from just my entire life. And I've witnessed a lot of loss. I've witnessed a lot of people around me lose a lot of people they love. And, I learned that whether we want to call it PTSD, whether we want to call it whatever it is, or whether we want to name it something different, there's some things in life that you see that you cannot unsee. There's a lot of things in life that you will go through that you cannot forget, no matter how hard you try. And I just want to be a reminder out there that you don't have to turn to anything that would destroy you. There are positive outlets out there. There are people you can talk to. There are people you can trust in. And honestly, if you really feel like you don't have nobody, understand that there is nothing wrong with you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you the way you were meant to be. But at the same time, your environment and the things you've been around play a part in your perception, in your language, in your actions, in the way you love, in the way you respond to tense situations. All of those things are learned behaviors. And you learn them from your environment and the kind of situation that you were placed in. Um, I think I'm pretty much done with that. And I just wanted to give you guys that warning. I know this is, you know, I just wanted to put it out there into the universe. And I hope that you guys understand that, like, I really want our people, I really want the people in general to come together and start some healing processes for everyone, whether it's the younger generation, whether it's the older generation, what is the generation before that, whatever it may be. But there's a lot of people out here that, are going through these things and they are suffering quietly. And, and every single day, like I said, There's some new news that comes out of some one of these cities out here that some Somali man did this or that, or some Somali woman did this or that, and everyone's shocked for a minute or two, and then it's not a story anymore. Why does this keep happening? And not just in the Somali community, in a lot of other communities as well. Why is this more rampant than before? Those are some questions to start asking ourselves. What is impacting us in our environment today that's making things a lot worse than it used to be? Who and why do they tell the lies they tell? Thank you.